This one is looking at the growing movement around upcycling and how it's contributing to a more circular food system. We have a really diverse panel from across the food sector to take part. Please welcome facilitator Heinrich, Director and Principal Consultant, Rawtec, Francesca Goodman-Smith from Transform Program Leader, Fight Food Waste CRC, who Ben mentioned, Evie Murdoch, the Head of Sustainability at Harris Farm Markets, Shane Quinn, the National Sales Manager from Mulgowie Farming Company, Vanessa Murillo, Co-Founder and Co-CEO of I Am Grounded, and Paul Conroy, CEO of FareShare. Take it away, Kat.
Thank you very much. Thank you everyone for joining us for the last session. I know we're standing between you and a cocktail, so we'll promise to keep it entertaining and interesting, and we have some show and tell here today to talk about the world of upcycled food. So we're really excited to have such a diverse range of speakers. Now, as you could probably tell from Ben's presentation, upcycling food is a trend that's really taking off across the world. Now, our job today is to talk about what's happening in Australia in this space, so we'll hear about it from a range of different perspectives. We're also going to talk about the link between upcycled food and the circular economy. We're going to talk about the benefits of upcycled food, as well as some of the barriers and what needs to happen to overcome those barriers. So to kick off this discussion, I would like to introduce our first speaker, Vanessa Murillo from I Am Grounded. Now, I Am Grounded is an Australian company making upcycled snacks. You may have grabbed some on your way in. They really give you a caffeine boost. I can attest to that because I had one about a minute before coming on stage. So welcome to you, Vanessa.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to be here today to represent I Am Grounded. Myself and my co-founder Lachlan, who you may have seen outside giving out the bars which are caffeinating you right now. We started I Am Grounded in 2018, and essentially what we're doing is we're playing in a space where consumers want to eat healthier, but they want to eat more sustainably, and we've got the means and the resources to do that through my contacts in coffee and Lachlan's contacts in health and nutrition. So essentially, I Am Grounded is an upcycled food company, and we're working with something that you all know very much, coffee. We're actually working with the coffee fruit. So some people here may or may not know that coffee is actually a cherry. It's a fruit. It has tart flavors. It tastes delicious, nothing like the coffee itself, but it is usually wasted. It's a wasted byproduct that has not being commercialized up until recently because of the way in which coffee and the way coffee is commercialized. It's just not a value stream that's been looked at until recently. I myself come from Colombia. I come from a family of coffee entrepreneurs. My father is a coffee scientist, and my family import coffee, and they've been doing so for about 20 years. I grew up in Colombia, migrated to Australia, and was able to see from farm to cup what's happening in the coffee farm, and it's amazing how much of this nutrient-rich, antioxidant, caffeinated product we're wasting. We waste about 60% of this coffee cherry is going to landfill. So in numbers, it's about 20 billion kilos of coffee fruit dumped per year, representing roughly 3,300 Olympic-sized swimming pools of waste that usually leaches into surrounding aquatic life and into soil, and represents a missed opportunity to work with coffee farmers to empower them to upcycle and to add value to a stream that is usually untapped. So I'm glad to be caffeinating you today, but also in each of the bars, we've upcycled about 70 grams of this coffee fruit from ending up in landfill.
Thank you, Vanessa. And can you show us the bar just
yeah, so
show us your product range?
We've got 3 products in market. You may have noticed that we do call in a time of day. So if you went to Adam's presentation around consumers and getting consumers, riled up about your product, we play on a time of day. So the 9 a.m., the 3 p.m. and the pick-me-up. We want to connect with consumers in a way that's easy for them, the water stream. We want people to be able to think less about grabbing it, but also have that impact. So we've learned that through being in market and testing, that consumers care about food waste and they care about making an impact, but they care about themselves first. And so we need to be very conscious around how we package and what our call outs are when we're producing an upcycled food product.
Yes, and I think I had the 9 a.m. one, which I don't know if it gives you an extra kick, but it feels like it. Thank you, Vanessa. Nice. It's a great overview. So now I'd like to ask you a few questions, Francesca. So Francesca Goodman-Smith from Fight Food Waste CRC. I understand you've been involved with upcycling food for some time. First in your previous role, working for a New Zealand supermarket, looking at the opportunities there, and more recently with the Upcycled Food Association as a co-chair of their standards committee. Can you tell us a little bit more about the global trends? We heard from Ben before, but what's happening across the world with upcycled food?
Thanks, Kat. Yes, Ben gave us a great summary before about upcycled food and why it's such an exciting new area to be exploring. In fact, it's not really a new practice. Lots of food manufacturers and food businesses will know that it's an age-old way of just making the most of what you have and getting the best out of your food and ingredients. For example, Vegemite is actually an upcycled food, so it uses brewers' spent yeast to create a new product. But what is new is the way that a community is forming around this sector, and the US is an amazing example of that. So in 2019, as Ben said, Forbes magazine valued the potential of the upcycled food sector to be worth $65 billion, which is crazy. It's a huge amount, and it's a big opportunity for us here in Australia as a huge food producing nation. And just recently, last week, Whole Food Markets in the US, a major retailer, named upcycled foods as the second biggest food trend for 2023. So it's available across all product categories, from ingredients to beverages to snack foods to cereals to soups, sauces, anything you can think of in the supermarket, an upcycled version can be created. So it's our role to look at that opportunity and create it.
And Francesca, Ben mentioned in his presentation about some certification scheme for upcycled food products. Why is that important?
So the biggest power of the new upcycled food movement is everybody communicating in the same way and using the same language, the same story to raise that awareness. So the upcycled food certification creates that common language, and it helps companies to go from every individual business having to reinvent the narrative, to reinvent the supply chains themselves, to working collectively towards a common goal. And we're already seeing that pay dividends. So in 2020 to 2021, consumer awareness of upcycled foods was around 10 to 15% of participants surveyed. Now, recent data is showing us that it's gone up to about 20 to 30%. So we're seeing really effective evidence for that consistent language and communication.
And obviously part of the theme for today's discussion is the circular economy and the connection between upcycling and the circular economy. Can you break that down for us a little bit, Francesca?
Yeah, sure, Kat. So the circular economy, 3 pillars of that are regenerating natural systems, designing out waste, and then circulating materials and products to their best and highest use. So my favourite thing about upcycled food is that it circulates food back into food. It keeps food as food, and that's absolutely the highest value use for what we produce.
And do you think that's important in terms of, you talked about the consumers before and the messaging, people are more aware of upcycled products. Is that messaging around the sustainability and the circularity, is that what's important for consumers, do you think, or is it something different?
There's been a lot of research going into consumer perceptions of upcycled food. So the top things that resonate with people is the environmental impact of their purchasing decisions. But we're seeing a lot more coming through around people associating health and nutrition with upcycled foods. And, you know, I see Kerry Ingredients in the audience, and they have joined those 2 things in their strategies. So they're talking about high value nutrition as well as better for the planet. So it's a really, you know, it's exciting to see consumers making those links between health for themselves and health for the planet.
Thanks, Francesca. Now I have a couple of questions for you, Paul. So Paul Conroy from FareShare, thanks so much for joining us. So obviously you come from a different perspective. You run a food relief charity. So can you tell us first of all a little bit about FareShare, just so as an introduction?
FareShare's been operating for 21 years, and we cook about 3 million meals a year. using recycled food or rescued food that we rescue ourselves, or increasingly other rescue organisations give us the ingredients. We operate from a big kitchen in Melbourne as well as one here in Brisbane, and we're completely powered by volunteers. So we have volunteers, we have a regular volunteer workforce each week of about 1,000 people, then we have school groups, corporate groups, and even people doing community service orders who have to clock up some hours will come and help us cook, and so we're completely volunteer powered making these meals.
Yeah, and I understand you're doing some pilots recently to transform the food, so you're looking to extend the shelf life, because as we heard in one of the earlier sessions on food rescue, that storage part, that transport part is a real challenge in terms of, you know, having the shelf life. So can you show us and tell us all about the work you're doing there?
So traditionally all the meals we'll produce we'll send out frozen, and frozen's the best way to stop the clock, and we'll send the meals out looking like this. And frozen's wonderful, and it's easy and low tech. The problem with frozen is it's bulky, it's heavy, and it's really expensive to actually, through a supply chain, move frozen meals everywhere. So it's really difficult. And so then we've been exploring what can we do to have a shelf life, shelf-stable product that can be kept at room temperature. And that's great it is great for the homeless person that doesn't have the ability to heat a meal up. It's great for a natural disaster when there is no facilities around. It's great for a remote community that gets cut off by floodwaters for months of the year. So we've been working increasingly over the last couple of months using both freeze-dried technology and retort technology to make a shelf-stable product. So it's a little bit, it can look like sometimes your camping food you might buy. It's got the same nutrition in the meals. Or you can get a retort product, which is once again kept just on a shelf, can last up to 2 to 5 years. And so this is actually sort of a way that we can then get to those really hard parts of food relief using rescued ingredients but adopting quite different technologies. Yeah.
Fantastic. And whereabouts are you in that phase? So you're in the pilot phase. Where are you going to from here?
Yeah, so we're working at the moment. We've been doing pilots of both freeze-dried and retort, and they both work really, really well. I think what you've got to find when you move into technology and rescue, you'll find you're now applying further science down the production line. So you need to be more precise on the specifications. So the fat content of your minced meat and the viscosity of your sauce all play a role when you're trying to actually retort or freeze a product. So we've done a lot of pilots at the moment, and we're looking at the different cost analysis of freeze-dried and retorting. I think freeze-dried's quite a specialised technology and requires quite a lot of capital, so I think we'll keep outsourcing that side of production for a time being, but the retort doesn't require the in-house expertise and doesn't require the capital investment, so that's probably where we're moving to next, is our own retorting facilities to be able to extend the shelf life of these products.
Thanks, Paul. Fantastic. I'd now like to introduce Evie Murdoch from Harris Farms. So just to start, Evie, can you just tell the audience a little bit about Harris Farms, just to introduce the organisation?
Yeah, so Harris Farm is a family-owned business. We have been operating for more than 50 years with up to 30 stores. At the moment, we're sitting just under that, 3 up here in Queensland now, but mainly in the Sydney metro region with a couple around Orange and Albury as well. Family-owned business currently being run by the 3 brothers, who are the Harris brothers, who are the children of Kathy and David, who started the business a number of years ago. Still market buying business too. Shane and I were chatting about that out the back before. So every day our fresh buying team still walks the floor of the markets in Sydney and in Brisbane to choose the food that lands in the store, typically between 7 and 11 a.m, depending on what time you arrive. But a fun business in that the smaller size scale means we try to be a little bit more market than supermarket is what we try and say. But when it comes to food waste, Kat, we tend to abide by the food waste hierarchy, which I'm sure everyone here today doesn't need to be taught about. But the best way for us to reduce the food waste that we have from the products we sell is to sell it again, and try and sell it one more time. And so if you're familiar, if you're a Harris Farm shopper, you might have seen that we retail the produce that is a premium grade. We also have our imperfect picks. And then outside of that, we have a Save Me range or a Save Me section in our store. So you'll always see the food that looks a little less than perfect in the Save Me section, and the same thing happens outside of fresh produce. So we do the same in meat. It all gets marked down right up until the day it's sold. After we can't sell it anymore, we do try and work with food rescue and local food charities, even local councils, local community groups, to use the food waste for food reuse. And then from there, we try and feed animals. But after that, we try and also participate in the compost markets and using food for other sources and get it back to growing food again. But when it comes to upcycle, traditionally upcycle for us sat at the bottom of the sell it, and sell it again kind of hierarchy. And we have had up to 8 or 9 products in our repurposed picks or upcycled range. But recently we have cut a lot of those, and I know we're going to get to that soon, but what we've found is the best products to upcycle are those that are easy to keep shelf stable, so things like breadcrumbs from bread or garlic bread from bread loaves, and we have lots of bread waste every day, so they're easy things to keep going, but it's harder than you think.
So which of the product lines did you cut, and why was that?
Yeah, so we sold for about 12 months or so upcycled smoothies and upcycled pizzas, and the idea for that was we were trying to find a home for our fruit waste and our veg waste. So veg went on top of pizzas and fruit went into upcycled smoothies. But to make an upcycled fruit smoothie, you also need to add milk or yogurt. Unfortunately, you can't upcycle most of those products unless you want to have a kefir smoothie. And you also have to repack it. It doesn't have a shelf life because it's made fresh every day. It also requires a lot of labour. And so we were finding that it's too cost prohibitive and that we were actually wasting more smoothies than we sold each day. And the same thing was happening in pizza. So for a pizza base, we had to get that already ready-made. We don't have a food safety kitchen to do full food preparation. It's just small batches. Then we get the veggies in, we cut them up, but if we didn't have a veggie that day, did we substitute it? What would the customer think? And did we even sell enough to justify it? So some statistics in the last 12 months, we sold $1.6 million worth of upcycled food, and we spent $1.7 million making upcycled food.
Yeah, so it's clear from your discussion, Evie, that not all things are suitable for upcycling from a business case perspective. So it's about working out which items are most practical.
Definitely.
So from Harris Farm's perspective, which products lend themselves best to be upcycled? Which one has the business case been strongest for?
So things like bread, where we can keep it shelf stable and where the upcycled product that we make doesn't have a one-day sell-by date. So, you know, I love what, Paul, you're doing with things like freeze-dried and taught food, because it means that you don't have a date that you have to abide by. So can you upcycle it into something that has much more or longer shelf stability? Yeah. That's definitely better.
Brilliant, thank you. And last but not least, we have Quinn from Mulgowie Farms. Now I'm going to mess up that pronunciation, apologies. Can you tell us a little bit about the organisation that you work for and how you found yourself looking into upcycled foods?
Sure, okay. So Mulgowie Farming Company, it's a family farming business, third generation again, been going for about 60, 70 years. We're one of Australia's largest vegetable growers. But for some context, we're still a small, medium-sized business. A typical big retail store like a Woolies Indooroopilly or a Coles Toorak would turn over more than we would, and probably make more profit too, frankly. So that's a challenge. So the family are committed farmers and environmentalists. They've really understood nutrition right from the get-go. The founders, John and Dell, came from a dairy background. And so we really focus on healthy soil, healthy plants, healthy people. So we look after our soils, we've got great nutritious plants for healthy people. And we're probably, us farmers are an example of unintended consequences, I suppose. Supply side economics and the consumer's always right have led essentially for us to be concentrated into growing 1 or 2 crops. So to many, many thousands of vegetable growers have left the industry over the last few decades. It's been harder to make money. How we've been able to stay in business was by concentrating on a few products, by farming year-round up and down the country, which adds complexity, a lot of assets required to do that, so that relevant to supermarkets, food service companies who want consistent supply all year round. And then essentially how We've stayed profitable is by giving the consumer what they wanted, which is typically being smaller and smaller pieces of vegetable or fruit in more and more plastic. And the consequence of that is we've generated more byproduct on the farms.
So Shane, what's the appeal from a farmer's perspective in doing upcycled foods?
Well, so it's exactly that. So we've generated more and more vegetative material, if you want. That's not going into a retail store or a food service. It's going to cow feed at the moment, which is very, very low return. It hurts us to see it. We got to look at it every day. But understanding the new plant-forward movement, alternative foods and so on, what their needs are, we thought, okay, there's got to be a way to process material into a format that we can get some value out of that. Because for a farmer's perspective, fundamentally, what drives our profit most is yield. So it's about managing your yield, your costs, and your sell price. Typically, your costs and your sell price used to be stable, less so now. And your biggest variable is yield, which is often driven by weather and how well we farm and so on. So if you can recover more of our crop, then that helps facilitate some of that.
Fantastic. And so what's some of the products that you looked into for upcycling?
Yeah, so we started initially, we dried our first vegetables 12 years ago. We just didn't have a market channel to make that work. As recently as 4 years ago, we had an inquiry from a supermarket, really good innovation as an NPD. We turned around from an idea to getting our waste broccoli onto the supermarket shelves as broccoli flour within about 3 or 4 months. But unfortunately, the supply chain we worked out just couldn't make it work. We could see there's something there, but the supply chain was too inefficient. And I feel a bit of a fraud and quite guilty, to be honest, because some people in the room know it, worked so hard over the last 4 or 5 years to make a viable supply chain for it. And just the complexity of where we are, the trade-offs on is this waste vegetables better turned into a compost back onto the farm, or I'm going to get better return as a food. All those kind of complexities and challenges are a real issue. Yeah.
I think you've hit on a really, really good point there, Shane. It's so challenging for companies to do this in isolation. And as we've heard from Evie as well, Harris Farm's looking within their own business and looking for those opportunities there. I think the real power comes when we can bring people together from different parts of the supply chain, look at where there's surplus, where there's waste, where there's processing capability, where there's market opportunities, and have that underlying supporting infrastructure so everyone doesn't have to reinvent the wheel and look for the opportunity themselves. And I think that's where we're seeing the success overseas in the Netherlands, as Tuan mentioned this morning, and also in the US. There is big movements and companies working together to make this happen.
Yeah, I agree. It's sort of like my gut feel is this is going to work. Like it has to happen, and that's what keeps me driving at it. But the challenge is the hurdle of getting capital to buy the equipment to make it happen. You've got to have your due diligence. You've got to have your numbers, and we just haven't got the resources, time, and effort to get there. So businesses who have ideas and concepts, and you have the resources, come to us with the business case, the P&L. I was talking to the Denver guys earlier. We were talking about that kind of thing. That's a fantastic thing you can bring to people like us to get that hurdle. Yeah.
Actually, you've hit on a really interesting point there as well. So there was this webinar last week that Vanessa sent to me from the US Upcycled Food Association, and they were talking about investment in capital. And they were saying, businesses, investors just wait until it's too late. They rely on the small guy to prove the concept and to drive the whole sector and to push that forward. But actually what we need is people to take a risk and take that jump and put that investment in, because if you look at the business case overseas, you can see it growing and you can see that pull coming through.
I think there's some realities with the challenges that aren't even financial, though, that getting product from A to B even is expensive. There's logistics required. Who stores it? Who keeps it cold? Who tries to keep it fresh? Does it have a use-by date? Do you have to abide by that date? Sniff test tends to work pretty well, but not when you want to sell the product. My team at my warehouse say to me, don't make me a waste depot. Don't talk about it. I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to be a waste depot. So I think there's some challenges to the reality of I'm producing food waste in 30 retail locations in Australia, and I welcome anyone who wants to come and pick it up for free, because you can have it. So there's some challenges, the realities of doing it.
Evie, you picked up a really good point there about, it's all interconnected when we're trying to solve food waste. So when you talk about yogurt before and not being able to use the older yogurt, you have to use new yogurt because it's past its best before date. I guarantee you that yogurt's perfectly good to eat, and I can attest to it because I've eaten 2-month-old yogurt and I'm still here. So, but we have to look at this as a systemic change. It's about all these different parts working together to help overcome those challenges. We do have a question, or a couple of questions here from the audience. We have from Travis Hatton. What do retailers need to kick their composting habits and upcycle all their food waste instead? He prompts funding, technology, think big. So maybe I'll start over there with you, Paul.
Oh, well, it's interesting, and we're a not-for-profit, so what are the two things that got us into the space? And we don't have a revenue stream. We give away everything for free, so we're the ultimate non-viable commercial business. But how did we get into it? It was an innovation grant that really got us into it. But for that, we wouldn't be able to afford to do it.
Yep.
So there's no doubt that there has to be some big thinkers and people for funders. And in our case, it was for not-for-profit. I suppose the other unique thing when you are not-for-profit, as opposed to corporate, your IP is your asset in the corporate world. But for us, in the not-for-profit world, our mission is to feed people. It's not to return to shareholders. So everything we do is open IP, and that's the great opportunity. So the more we learn, our mission is to feed people, not to make a financial return. So we will share that IP, and that's the great bit of it in terms of that open IP basis. And that's what we benefit from that, and we should benefit the others. But that's hard to apply in the corporate world necessarily.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. Any other perspectives on that? How retailers, what they can do to not just compost their food waste, but make sure it's upcycled?
So there's lots of things we're trying. We are trying drying food. We're trying feeding animals at Taronga Zoo at the moment. We have digesters on site, anaerobic ones. We're trying waste to energy. We're working on compost. So we're open to ideas. We're trying new things. Again, whatever we can do at the store to minimise the volume to then process it elsewhere is always the best. So dehydrating it, getting rid of spare water, things like that is awesome. But as well, like I said, Kat, if we can sell it again, sell the second grade version, sell the third grade version, then that's the best outcome in keeping the best, highest value for the product. But we have lots of waste that's not even retail waste, and this is something, Shane, I know you've got lots of this type of waste as well, but we have waste that we create before we've even tried to sell the product, and that's a hard thing to deal with as well. So the outside leaves of a cauliflower, we don't sell them. The husk of a corn, it's either our waste or it's your waste. You can peel it, we can peel it for you. That's food waste. So finding upcycle things out of those products, that's a new frontier that we're trying to get into.
Yeah, Evie, you've just provided the perfect segue for me, thank you. We had a question here from Claire Neller. Where are the untapped sources and markets for new upcycled products? So you talked just then about the cauliflower leaves.
Cauliflower leaves, I tell you. And I also, Simon from Compass Group said he has a heap of watermelon peel. Well, I've got 10 tonnes of citrus waste a week if someone also wants that. We make fresh orange juice every day at our Sydney Markets warehouse. So every week we're shipping out 10 tonnes of food waste, most of which goes to landfill. So there is innovation starting to happen around extracting pectin out of peel, things like that. You can turn some of it into marmalade, but marmalade's not that popular anymore. But that is also the new frontier. It's making food out of things that we haven't thought of food before.
Anyone else have something to add on that?
Yep. They just chuck one in as well. I think there's so much complexity in it. We've got to find simple solutions as possible or to use assets already there.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So
for an example, I'll plug Bardi now here, we use shoulder flies. So if all the consumer food waste is typically going to landfill already, if you can get all that food waste in one place together, feed it to the soldier flies, and then their maggots can be used for protein, whatever. But the frass they produce, like the byproduct of their eating, could be very, very good fertiliser. So you bring that back to our farms, and then we're keeping our natural system going. and then that we feel less guilty then about shipping off the nutrition from the farm into the food market. So it's, I think we've got to think about simplicity where we can because of the complex system.
Absolutely.
I'm keen to hear from Vanessa about yours, because one of the easiest ways to upcycle food, not that it's easy, as we've heard, there's lots of challenges, but is looking at byproduct streams. So something that has a consistent supply.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So with coffee, obviously we consume so much coffee. Roughly every day it's about 3 billion cups that are drunk around the world, which is a huge amount of coffee. So what we do is we add a value chain to that already existing value chain. So we're just adding another step or another few steps to collect what is usually discarded, and we then create a value on farm so that farmers can create more economic opportunity from that, but also we're not adding any more resources outside of that harvesting or that farm or those farms. We're collecting and we're processing, and we're just thinking innovatively around how we're going to process that. But in terms of the question, we can unseen, untapped, I think what was Ben saying, the third one, but essentially unwanted. So in unseen, coffee husk, coffee fruit, cacao fruit. Cacao is actually a fruit. It tastes delicious. We're seeing things done in bread, in the spent barley from the beer making process, in the okra from tofu. There are so many byproducts that already exist in market. We just need to think innovatively around potentially what we can do, but as I was saying, think of the consumer. What is in it for the consumer? Is it functional? Is it healthy? Or is it something that is going to benefit them in some sort of way? I have, from experience, can attest that is how a key to messaging your upcycled food product, I guess.
Thank you. And we've got a couple of suggestions from people in the audience who know what to do with your orange peel. So we had someone saying citric acid is a good natural pesticide. There you go. We also had someone saying that vermouth, I don't know how to pronounce this, vermouth, yes. Alcohol of some description, would want your peel. So there you go.
We have approached a couple of alcohol makers for that exact reason.
Fantastic. So I've got another question, or I've got quite a few questions here. So I think we'll go back to you, Vanessa. So how do we collectively help consumers to link food waste reduction to their sustainability impact, and thus helping to make upcycled foods attractive?
That is a good question. I think, we do a lot of A/B testing on our packaging and our call-outs, and we've learned that consumers don't want to be informative heavy, so they want it to be very easy for them to digest. We've started testing out QR codes to link to an impact page on our website or to informative blogs that we create. So I found that sort of mirage of being informative but also having a way where they can gather more information has been really helpful for people to be empowered to learn more about food and food waste. But the number one thing that people say is, wow, I didn't even know coffee is a fruit. And that is, of course, the challenge that we have as a brand, is to be change agents and to come on panels like this and talk about that unseen part of the food production that unfortunately a lot of farmers face, and a lot of people like myself want to be able to assist into making into consumer products.
Yeah, thank you. I had a question. What are the logistic requirements to support upcycling from supermarkets? So anyone have any perspectives on that? Is it backhauling?
I can jump in quickly around this. So I think it's relying on partnerships throughout the supply chain. So I mentioned it before, but I'll say it again. I think it's bringing the right people together to get the solution. So you need somebody who's really motivated to create a product and sees an opportunity from that byproduct. So we see it a lot in the bread space, and so bread is obviously a highly wasted product. We see companies collect that surplus bread and they turn that into craft beer. So there's a company, Mega Ale, that creates a craft beer from Coles bread waste, which is really exciting and really cool. And it's not something that Coles would do on their own, but they do it because there's an off-take partner who is really motivated. So there has to be value in it for the end user, and they need to see the market potential, and then there needs to be that, relationship with the retailer as well. So there's countless examples of how that works. We're doing trials at the moment with Woolworths and Perfection Fresh and a company called Leaf Protein Co., who are doing some work on collating the leafy material from back of store and turning that into innovative products as well. So really exciting opportunities. It's just, it takes those motivated businesses who come with the solution, because it's not retailers' core business to upcycle, but they are there to support those supply chains where there's willing parties to offtake that material.
Francesca, you're all about the segues today. You're perfect, thank you. So, you talked about the need for collaboration across the supply chain. The question here from Rose Gooding: how do you suggest we initiate a discussion across the food value chain to ensure collaboration happens, so that you get the organisations with the waste streams and byproducts connecting up?
I can kind of speak to that. As a member of the Upcycled Food Association, there's so much resource sharing that happens within ingredient suppliers, retailers, food brands, all the way to consumers that want to actually participate in having this community of sharing of knowledge and of skills, because we are paving essentially a new road into how we're going to transform food. So Francesca and I have actually been talking about potentially looking at creating a community here in Australia, because we know that there's so many people playing in the space, but like you said, it can be very disconnected, or it can be quite a lonely road when you're not sure who to lean on for specific things like ingredients or shelf life testing or food science. And there's, I know in the UFA, it's been one of the key ways that they've grown that movement. So we need to bring some sort of same thinking to the way we do business here in Australia.
I think, Kat, as well, though, like from our perspective, and I'm sure, the Coles and Woolworths of the world are the same. You gave an example just then, Fran, as well. But there is a lot of collaboration happening along value chains. Shane and I were having a backdoor, very quiet, please talk softer conversation out the back as well around, well, wait a minute, there's an opportunity here for us to talk about something. So I actually do think a lot of collaboration is starting to happen, and sometimes all you need to do is just ask.
Wonderful. And another question from Rose: how do you suggest we another question from Ruby, how do retailers balance having enough stock or having enough variety for consumers versus reducing the amount of food that needs to be upcycled in the first place?
Excellent question. We always try and have a store that looks abundant and fresh, but we don't want to waste food. We never intend to buy to waste. That's where our programs with the Save Me sections come in, where the imperfect picks section comes in, and where seasonality comes in too. So you won't see huge volumes of produce. It's not in season, it's not available. If the weather causes an incident and we don't have a product, we tend to not stock a product, or we have it at a very expensive price because there's not very much of it. But we never go out to intend to waste food. But there's other ways we're trying to look at creating abundance without having abundance. So we tend to stack fresh produce, for example, in beautiful looking pyramids. It's a very manual process. It's actually a very high labour cost to our business, people stacking pyramids. So we've been talking about trialling some pyramid foam countertops, essentially, so to create the appearance of abundance, to create the shopping experience that people like to have without having to have abundant produce underneath it.
Excellent, yes, and we've seen other examples of that in the bakery sector. We just launched the bakery sector action plan earlier, and yes, we see that with, for example, Baker's Delight, reducing the size of their shelves and having collapsible shelves as a way to show abundance throughout the day, even as their stock sells out. So yes, some great examples there. Now we've got about a couple minutes left, and I just wanted to end on, given all the challenges with upcycling food waste, but also the size of the opportunity in terms of reducing food waste, moving to more circular economy practices, etc. What is the thing that's needed to accelerate Australia's transition towards having more upcycled products? And I might start on your end, and we'll work our way down and end with Francesca.
So to me, it's interesting because upcycling is this to make it sustainable, you've got to have the supply side capability of doing it, and then you've got to have the demand side to make it viable, and it's inherently risky. And the best example is what you see in soft recycling plastics at the moment, which is sort of collapsing because it's all got all the technology we can do it, we can make up stuff with it, but it's just not viable as a business. And so in the case of a not-for-profit, what reduces the risk and makes it more viable? One is collaboration across the sector. So the more the sector can be more efficient in food rescue, in my example, I just need to be a beneficiary of food rescue. I don't need to do it. If there's a smarter person to do it, it reduces the risk for everybody. And second, it's the sharing of IP. But the example of a retailer, so our IP for a lot of what we do comes from the retailer R&D departments. It comes from the universities that are happy to share it and see people trialling it. And the more there's sharing of knowledge, inherently decrease the risks. And then the third aspect, obviously, people or funds that are happy to take some risk on some money, knowing that not everyone's going to be a winner, but you don't hit it every time. But inherently, it's a risk-reward approach you have to take, and it's inherently different from just looking at a supply-side food rescue when you're actually now going, I'm trying to make it sustainable and it's risky. Yeah.
Vanessa?
One of the biggest challenges we have is on the planogram, I guess, in store when we're selling into supermarkets or independents, is having a space for upcycled foods or for foods that are in this movement. It doesn't really exist. It's not, retailers' first thing that they think about. So it would be amazing if consumers can easily identify upcycled ingredients in a way similar to what Harris Farm are doing, so that more brands can really potentially play in this shelf space, and there's a space made. I know it's a tough thing, but that would be make a huge difference for brands like us trying to pave the way.
Shane, just quickly, we've run out of time, we're in deficit.
I really try to be the grumpy grower, but food's too cheap. The reason we're in this space is because we haven't priced in the externalities of waste, and us having to not be able to put back in enough into our nature-based system to maintain our yields. So there's no way around it. Food's too cheap.
Okay.
I think from our perspective as a retailer, we are driven by what the consumer buys as well. So if you want to be a conscious consumer, keep buying the imperfect picks. Help us help stock upcycled products and create that demand and that pull-through, and it forces us to keep innovating as well.
And you've got the last word, Francesca.
No pressure. I've said it lots, I'll say it again, collaboration. So if you've got waste, come and see us. If you've got opportunities and ideas, come and see us. Fight Food Waste Limited want to break down those barriers that exist to making this scale. So please come and talk to us. We're here to hear your ideas and support you on the journey.
Well, would you join me in please thanking our panellists?